The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Rebecca stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby of the Grand Pearl Hotel. Her shoulders ached from carrying her laptop bag through 3 different airports, and all she wanted was a decent meal before collapsing into bed. The flight from Seattle had been delayed twice, and she'd been traveling for nearly 12 hours straight. She rolled her small suitcase across the polished marble floor, following the signs toward the hotel restaurant. The place looked expensive, with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. White tablecloths covered each table, and soft jazz music drifted from hidden speakers. Rebecca glanced down at her clothes, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. Her black blazer was wrinkled from the flight and her hair probably looked like a mess, but she was a paying guest at this hotel and she was hungry. That should be enough. The hostess stand stood near the entrance to the dining area, a sleek wooden podium with a small lamp and a leather-bound reservation book. A young woman in her mid-20s stood behind it, scrolling through something on a tablet. She had perfectly styled blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her black dress looked like it cost more than Rebecca's entire suitcase of clothes. "Excuse me," Rebecca said politely, offering a tired smile. "Table for 1, please?" The hostess looked up, and for just a split second, something flickered across her face. It wasn't quite disgust, but it wasn't welcoming either. Her eyes traveled from Rebecca's face down to her wrinkled blazer, then to her rolling suitcase, and finally back up again. The whole inspection took maybe 3 seconds, but Rebecca felt every moment of it. "Do you have a reservation?" the hostess asked, her voice flat and professional, but somehow cold. "No, I don't," Rebecca replied, still trying to keep things friendly. "But I'm staying at the hotel. Room 847. I just flew in and really need to grab some dinner." The hostess didn't even glance at the dining room behind her. She just shook her head slightly, like Rebecca had asked for something completely unreasonable. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked this evening. We can't accommodate walk-ins without a reservation." Rebecca frowned. She leaned slightly to the side, looking past the hostess into the restaurant. She counted at least 6 empty tables from where she stood, maybe more toward the back. The restaurant looked maybe half full at most. Several tables still had the chairs pushed in, clearly waiting for guests that hadn't arrived yet. "Are you sure?" Rebecca asked, keeping her tone polite but pointed. "Because I can see several empty tables right there." The hostess's jaw tightened slightly. She glanced over her shoulder, barely looking at the dining room, then turned back with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Those tables are all reserved. We have parties coming in throughout the evening." Just as she said this, an older couple walked up behind Rebecca. The man wore an expensive-looking suit, and the woman had on a pearl necklace and a designer handbag that Rebecca recognized from magazine ads. The hostess's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her face lit up with a genuine smile, and her voice became warm and welcoming. "Good evening. Welcome to the Pearl Room. Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" "No, we don't," the man said pleasantly. "We're just in town for the night and heard this place was excellent." "Oh, absolutely. We'd be delighted to have you," the hostess gushed. She grabbed 2 menus from beneath the podium and gestured toward the dining room. "Right this way. I have a lovely table by the window for you." Rebecca stood there, frozen in disbelief, as the hostess led the couple past her and into the restaurant. They were seated at one of the supposedly reserved tables she'd just been told about. The couple settled in, accepting their menus and water glasses, completely unaware of what had just happened. The hostess returned to her stand, and Rebecca was still standing there, her hand gripping the handle of her suitcase a little tighter than before. A familiar feeling settled in her chest, something she'd experienced before but had hoped she wouldn't have to deal with here. Not at a place like this, not in a professional setting where her money was as good as anyone else's. "So those people didn't need a reservation?" Rebecca asked quietly. The hostess barely looked at her. "They were fortunate we had a cancellation just now." "A cancellation that happened in the 30 seconds between when you turned me away and when they walked in?" 2 servers had stopped near the hostess stand, pretending to organize menus but clearly listening to the exchange. One of them, a young man with slicked-back hair, exchanged a quick glance with the hostess. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in what looked like amusement. The other server, a woman with dark lipstick, didn't even try to hide her smirk. The hostess's voice took on an edge of irritation. "Ma'am, I've explained the situation. We're fully booked. If you'd like to make a reservation for another evening during your stay, I'd be happy to help you with that. Rebecca felt her face growing warm. Other diners were starting to notice the conversation. A man at a nearby table had lowered his newspaper slightly, watching over the top of it. This was the moment where she had two choices. She could make a scene, demand to speak to a manager, raise her voice and insist on being treated fairly, or she could handle this differently. She took a slow breath and made her decision. Actually, yes, Rebecca said, her voice perfectly calm and even. I would love to have the manager's business card. And your name, please. The hostess blinked, clearly surprised by the sudden shift. She'd probably expected an argument or for Rebecca to simply leave in frustration. Instead, Rebecca stood there patiently, waiting. The servers had stopped smirking and were now watching with more caution. My name is Chelsea, the hostess said slowly, and I can get you a business card. She reached under the podium and pulled out a small card holder, extracting a cream-colored card with gold lettering. She handed it to Rebecca with barely concealed satisfaction, probably assuming this was the end of the interaction. Problem customer dealt with. Complaint that would go nowhere. Just another person making noise. Thank you, Chelsea, Rebecca said, reading the card carefully. She pulled out her phone and took a clear photo of the business card, then looked up at the hostess stand area. Do you mind stepping aside for just a moment? Chelsea frowned but moved slightly to the left. Rebecca raised her phone and took several photos of the dining room, making sure the timestamp was visible. She captured the empty tables, the relatively sparse crowd, and the couple who'd just been seated. She took her time, methodical and calm. The servers had disappeared quickly, suddenly finding urgent tasks elsewhere. Chelsea's face had gone from smug to uncertain. What are you doing? Just documenting my visit, Rebecca replied pleasantly. She tucked her phone back into her pocket and gave Chelsea one more look. It wasn't angry or aggressive. It was something else, something that made the hostess take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what came next. Thank you for your time this evening, Rebecca said. She turned her suitcase around and began walking back toward the lobby, her rolling bag making soft clicking sounds against the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear Chelsea saying something to another staff member in a hushed, nervous voice. But Rebecca didn't look back. She walked straight through the lobby, past the front desk and toward the elevators. Her reflection appeared in the polished brass doors as she waited. She looked tired, yes, but there was something else in her eyes now. Determination. Purpose. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open. Rebecca stepped inside and pressed the button for the 8th floor. As the doors closed, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Chelsea and her colleagues had no idea who they'd just refused service to. They had no idea what was about to happen. And that was exactly how Rebecca wanted it. Sometimes the quietest response was the most powerful one. Sometimes walking away wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And Rebecca was very, very good at strategy. Rebecca's hotel room was nothing special. Just a standard business traveler setup with a queen bed, a small desk, and a view of the parking garage. She dropped her suitcase by the closet and tossed her blazer over the chair. Her stomach was still growling, but food could wait a few more minutes. Right now, she had work to do. She pulled out her laptop and set it on the desk, waiting for it to boot up. While the screen flickered to life, she ordered a sandwich from a nearby deli using a delivery app. Nothing fancy, just fuel. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning out exactly what needed to happen next. The thing was, Rebecca hadn't lied to Chelsea downstairs. She really was staying in room 847. She really had just flown in from Seattle. But what she hadn't mentioned, what Chelsea had no way of knowing, was that Rebecca wasn't just any tired traveler looking for dinner. She was the newly appointed regional vice president for Lux Pacific Hotels, the parent company that owned the Grand Pearl and 47 other properties across the western United States. She'd been in the position for exactly 3 weeks. Her boss, the senior VP of operations, had been clear about her first assignment. Visit the properties unannounced. Don't tell the managers you're coming. Don't flash your corporate credentials. Just be a regular guest and see how the staff actually treats people when they think nobody important is watching. It was the only way to get the truth about how these hotels really operated. Rebecca had visited 3 properties before this one, and they'd all passed with flying colors. Professional staff, welcoming atmosphere, no issues. She'd actually started to think this assignment would be boring. Just a formality. Check the boxes and file some positive reports. Then she'd walked into the Pearl Room restaurant. Her laptop finished loading, and she entered her password. The screen filled with various applications and folders, but she clicked on one specific icon. It was a secure portal that connected her directly to the company's internal systems. Every employee had some version of this, but hers had a lot more access than most. She logged into the reservation system for the Grand Pearl Hotel. It took her about 30 seconds to navigate to the restaurant's booking page. There it was, displayed in neat columns and color-coded blocks. Today's date, dinner service. The system showed every reservation for the evening, along with walk-ins and table status. Rebecca leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the data. At 6:15, which was exactly when she'd been turned away, the restaurant had 14 tables occupied out of 35 total. 40% capacity. There were exactly 3 reservations scheduled to arrive after 6:30. 3, and none of those reservations were for the tables currently sitting empty near the windows. The same tables where that couple had been seated right in front of her. She took screenshots of everything, saving them to a secure folder. Then she did something else. She went back through the system, checking the restaurant's occupancy rates for the past month. Tuesday through Thursday evenings, the slow nights, consistently ran between 35 and 50% capacity. Yet according to the notes section, walk-in guests were regularly being told the restaurant was fully booked. Rebecca sat back in her chair, processing what she was seeing. This wasn't just one hostess having a bad day. This was a pattern. Her phone buzzed. The food delivery was downstairs. She rode the elevator down, grabbed her sandwich from the driver, and headed back up without going anywhere near the restaurant. Back in her room, she ate mechanically, barely tasting the food while she continued her investigation. Next, she accessed the hotel's security camera system. This required higher-level credentials, which she had. The legal department had made sure all regional VPs could access security footage when needed for investigations. She pulled up the camera that covered the restaurant entrance and hostess stand. The footage was clear, high definition. She scrolled back to 6 o'clock and started watching at double speed. Guest after guest approached the hostess stand. Some were turned away. Some were seated immediately. Rebecca slowed the playback to normal speed and started taking notes. 6:05. Young couple, casually dressed, turned away. Restaurant clearly has empty tables visible in the background. 6:12. Single man in a business suit seated immediately without reservation. 6:15. That was her. She watched herself approach Chelsea, watched the brief conversation, saw the older couple arrive and get seated. Seeing it from this angle made it even more obvious what had happened. 6:23. Family of 4, parents and 2 kids, told there was a long wait. They left. 6:28. 2 women in evening dresses seated immediately at a prime table. The pattern wasn't just obvious. It was documented, time-stamped, and impossible to deny. Rebecca felt a knot forming in her stomach, but it wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, more focused. This was discrimination, plain and simple, and it was happening at a property under her responsibility. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized on her first day. It rang twice before a man answered. Tom Chen, Corporate Investigations. Tom, it's Rebecca Williams. I need to request a full investigation into the Grand Pearl Hotel in Portland, specifically the restaurant operations. There was a pause. Tom was good at his job, which meant he knew better than to ask unnecessary questions. What are we looking at? Discriminatory service practices. I'm uploading documentation to the secure server right now. Security footage, reservation system data, and my personal account as a guest who was refused service tonight. I think this goes beyond one incident. Understood. I'll have a team start pulling records first thing tomorrow. Do you want to wait for the investigation to conclude before taking action? Rebecca thought about Chelsea's smirk, about those servers exchanging glances, about the family with 2 kids who'd been told there was no room. Pull the records, but also check the complaint history. I want to know if guests have reported this before. And Tom, I want to know where those complaints went. If they were filed and buried, I want to know who buried them. I'll have preliminary findings to you within 24 hours. Thank you. Rebecca ended the call and opened her email. She drafted a message to Diane Reeves, the Regional Director of Human Resources. Diane was tough, fair, and had zero tolerance for the kind of behavior Rebecca had witnessed tonight. She outlined everything that had happened, attached the screenshots and her notes, and marked it urgent. Before hitting send, Rebecca paused. Her finger hovered over the mouse. Once she sent this, there was no going back. People would lose their jobs. There would be media attention, possibly lawsuits. The hotel's reputation would take a hit. Corporate would have questions about how this had been allowed to happen. But then she thought about something else. She thought about all the guests who'd been turned away from that restaurant over the past weeks and months. People who'd been made to feel unwelcome, judged, dismissed. People who'd gone back to their rooms or left the hotel feeling smaller than when they'd arrived. People who'd maybe even questioned their own worth because of how they'd been treated. She clicked send. The email whooshed away into the digital void. Rebecca closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city lights. In the reflection on the glass, she could see her own face looking back at her. She looked tired, but there was something else there too. Determination. Purpose. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Diane. Got your email. This is serious. I'm pulling in legal and starting documentation procedures tonight. Can you come to the corporate office tomorrow at 9? We need your full statement on record, Rebecca typed back. I'll be there. She set her phone down and finished her sandwich. Tomorrow would be a long day. There would be meetings, statements, documentation. The investigation would expand. More evidence would surface. She had no doubt about that. When you started pulling on a thread like this, the whole sweater usually unraveled, but tonight, sitting in her quiet hotel room with the city spread out below her, Rebecca felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt grateful. Grateful that she'd been the one to walk into that restaurant tonight. Because she had the power to do something about it. She had the position, the authority, and the resources to make sure this stopped happening. Not everyone who experienced discrimination had those tools. Most people just had to swallow the hurt, accept the unfairness, and move on with their lives. But Rebecca didn't have to do that. And more importantly, she wouldn't let the next person have to do that either. She stood up, stretched, and started getting ready for bed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, Chelsea and her colleagues probably thought they'd gotten away with it. They probably went home feeling smug, convinced that nothing would come of one woman's complaint. They had no idea that the foundation beneath their feet had already started to crack. And by this time tomorrow, it would be crumbling completely. Rebecca sat in the conference room on the 14th floor of the Lux Pacific corporate headquarters, watching the investigation unfold in real time. 24 hours had passed since she'd sent that email to Diane, and what had started as documentation of one incident had exploded into something much bigger. Tom Chen stood at the front of the room with a laptop connected to a large screen on the wall. Diane sat to Rebecca's right, taking notes on a legal pad. On Rebecca's left was James Rodriguez, the corporate attorney who specialized in employment law and discrimination cases. The atmosphere in the room was tense, focused. This is what we found, Tom said, pulling up a spreadsheet on the screen. Over the past 6 months, the Grand Pearl received 47 guest complaints specifically about the restaurant. 47. That's nearly 2 per week. Rebecca leaned forward. What kind of complaints? Tom clicked to the next slide, which showed a breakdown by category. 31 complaints about being refused service or told the restaurant was fully booked when it clearly wasn't. 12 complaints about rude or dismissive treatment from staff. 4 complaints about being seated in undesirable locations while other guests received better tables. He paused, and when we analyzed the complaints by guest demographics, a clear pattern emerged. The next slide made Rebecca's stomach turn. The overwhelming majority of complainants shared similar characteristics. They were people who didn't fit whatever image Chelsea and her colleagues had decided belonged in that restaurant. It was systematic. It was documented. And it was damning. Where did these complaints go? Diane asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. Tom's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. They all went to the general manager, Kenneth Morrison. According to protocol, any complaint involving potential discrimination should have been immediately forwarded to corporate HR and legal. None of them were. None? James, the attorney, looked up sharply. Not a single one in 6 months? Not one, Tom confirmed. Morrison responded to each complaint with a standard apology email, sometimes offered a discount or complimentary service, and then filed the complaints away. He never escalated a single incident. We also found internal emails between Morrison and the restaurant manager, discussing how to handle guests who, quote, didn't match the upscale clientele they were trying to attract. Rebecca felt heat rising in her chest. This wasn't just Chelsea being unprofessional on a bad day. This was policy, unwritten illegal policy that came from management. Do we have those emails? James asked. Tom nodded. We have everything. Morrison kept detailed records, probably thinking he was covering himself somehow. It actually makes our case stronger. Diane set down her pen.
What about the staff?
How deep does this go? We interviewed 3 employees who were willing to talk confidentially, Tom said. They confirmed that hostess Chelsea Anderson and 2 servers, Kevin Park and Jennifer Walsh, were the primary enforcers of this policy. But they also said Morrison encouraged it. He told them the restaurant needed to maintain a certain image. He gave bonuses to staff who, quote, curated the right atmosphere. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment. Bonuses. They were being rewarded for discrimination. We also found security footage going back 3 months. Tom continued. I can show you if you want, but it's more of the same. Guests being turned away while tables sit empty. Different treatment based on appearance. It's consistent and it's clear. I've seen enough, Rebecca said quietly. What's our legal exposure here? James pulled out his own folder of documents. Significant. This is textbook discrimination under the Civil Rights Act. We're looking at potential federal lawsuits from any guest who was refused service. The company could face serious fines. And if this goes public, which it probably will, the reputational damage could affect all our properties. What do you recommend? Diane asked. Immediate termination of everyone involved, starting with Morrison. He's management, he knew the law, and he actively encouraged illegal behavior. Chelsea, Kevin, and Jennifer as well. They were the ones implementing the discrimination directly. We document everything, we prepare for potential lawsuits, and we get ahead of this with a public statement about our zero-tolerance policy. Rebecca looked at Diane. You agree? Diane nodded slowly. I hate firing people. I really do. But this isn't a training issue or a misunderstanding. These employees knew exactly what they were doing. They made deliberate choices to discriminate against guests. And Morrison covered it up. We can't keep people like that in our organization. What about the other staff? Rebecca asked Tom. The ones who weren't actively participating but didn't speak up? That's trickier, Tom admitted. Some of them are new and might have been too intimidated to report what they saw. Others have been there for years and probably should have said something. We're recommending mandatory retraining for all remaining staff and bringing in new management to reset the culture. Rebecca stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city stretched out in all directions. Thousands of people going about their lives, each with their own stories and struggles. How many of them had walked into places where they weren't welcome? How many had been judged before they even opened their mouths? When do we do this? She asked, still looking out the window. Today, James said firmly. The longer we wait, the more liability we accumulate. And ethically, we can't let them keep working there knowing what we know. Rebecca turned back to face the room. Then let's do it right. I want to be there when it happens. These employees need to understand that this came from the top, that we take it seriously, and that there are real consequences for treating people this way. Diane looked surprised. You want to go back there? Rebecca, you're the victim in this. You don't have to confront them. I'm not the victim, Rebecca said quietly. I'm the regional VP who has the power to stop this. The real victims are all those guests who complained and got nowhere. The families who were turned away. The people who left that hotel feeling like they weren't good enough. I'm doing this for them. 2 hours later, Rebecca was back at the Grand Pearl Hotel, but this time she didn't arrive alone. Diane and James flanked her as they walked through the lobby. Tom had gone ahead to coordinate with hotel security. The afternoon shift had just started, which meant Chelsea, Kevin, and Jennifer were all working. The hotel's assistant manager, a woman named Patricia who hadn't been implicated in any wrongdoing, met them in the hallway outside the restaurant. Her face was pale. Mr. Morrison is in his office. He doesn't know you're here yet. Good, Diane said. Let's keep it that way for now. We need to speak with Chelsea Anderson first. Can you call her away from the hostess stand without making a scene? Patricia nodded and walked into the restaurant. Rebecca watched through the doorway as Patricia spoke briefly to Chelsea, who looked annoyed but followed her out into the hallway. The moment Chelsea saw Rebecca, her face went completely white. "What's going on?" Chelsea asked, her voice unsteady. Diane stepped forward, her voice professional but cold. "Chelsea Anderson, I'm Diane Reeves, Regional Director of Human Resources for Lux Pacific Hotels. This is James Rodriguez, our corporate attorney. We need you to come with us to the manager's office now." Chelsea's eyes darted between them, landing on Rebecca, recognition and fear mixed together on her face. "I don't understand." "Who is she?" "I'm Rebecca Williams," Rebecca said calmly. "Regional Vice President. I was the guest you refused service to 2 nights ago." The color that had drained from Chelsea's face somehow managed to drain even more. I didn't know. I thought, that's the problem," Rebecca interrupted. "You thought I was just someone you could dismiss. Someone who didn't matter. But here's what you didn't think about. Every single guest matters. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect and service. That's not just company policy. That's basic human decency." Chelsea opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Come with us," Diane said, her tone leaving no room for argument. They walked through the hotel hallways in silence. Patricia had already gathered Kevin and Jennifer into a conference room. When Chelsea entered and saw them there, her face crumbled. She knew. They all knew. Kenneth Morrison arrived 5 minutes later, called in from his office. He walked in with confidence, clearly annoyed at being summoned. Then he saw Rebecca, Diane, and James sitting on one side of the table with folders spread out in front of them, and his confidence evaporated. "What's this about?" he asked, but his voice betrayed him. He already suspected. James opened the first folder. "Mr. Morrison, we're here to discuss a pattern of discriminatory practices at this hotel's restaurant, which you have not only failed to address but actively encouraged." And then, methodically and professionally, they laid it all out. The complaints, the emails, the security footage. The evidence was overwhelming, and with each piece of documentation, Morrison seemed to shrink further into his chair. Chelsea stared at the table. Kevin kept glancing at the door like he might run. Jennifer's hands trembled. Rebecca didn't say much during the presentation. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. But when James finished and asked if anyone had anything to say in their defense, Rebecca finally spoke. "I want you to understand something," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person you turned away, every family you made feel unwelcome, every individual you judged based on how they looked instead of who they were. You took something that should have been simple, a meal, a moment of hospitality, and you weaponized it. You hurt people, and you did it deliberately." Chelsea was crying now. Morrison looked like he might be sick. But Rebecca felt no satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Diane delivered the final verdict. "Kenneth Morrison, Chelsea Anderson, Kevin Park, Jennifer Walsh, you are all terminated effective immediately." The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. And just like that, it was done. The conference room fell silent after Diane delivered the terminations. Morrison sat frozen in his chair, his face a shade of gray that looked unhealthy. Chelsea had stopped crying and now just stared blankly at the wall. Kevin was the first to speak. "This is insane," he said, his voice shaking with either fear or anger. Rebecca couldn't tell which. "You're destroying our lives over nothing, overdoing our jobs." James looked up from his papers, his expression hard. "Your job was to provide excellent service to all guests, not to discriminate based on appearance or background. You weren't doing your job. You were breaking federal law." "We were just following Morrison's lead," Jennifer spoke up suddenly, pointing at the general manager. "He told us to maintain standards. He said the restaurant had an image to protect." Morrison's head snapped toward her. "Don't put this on me. You all knew what you were doing." "Actually, you're both right," Diane said, cutting through the rising tension. "Mr. Morrison, as management, you set the tone and created an environment where discrimination was not only accepted but rewarded. That makes you more culpable, not less. And as for the rest of you, following orders isn't an excuse when those orders are illegal and harmful. You each made choices. You each bear responsibility." Rebecca watched them turn on each other, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. These were people who'd somehow convinced themselves that what they were doing was acceptable. They'd rationalized it, normalized it, and now they were facing the consequences of those choices. "Can I say something?" Rebecca asked quietly. The room turned to her. "I want you to think about the people you turned away. Really think about them. There was a family 2 nights ago. Parents with 2 young kids. You told them there was no room. Those kids probably remembered that. They probably asked their parents why they couldn't eat there. What do you think those parents told them?" Chelsea looked down at her hands. "Or the young couple who came in dressed casually," Rebecca continued. "Maybe they were celebrating something. Maybe it was their anniversary and they couldn't afford fancy clothes but wanted to have a nice dinner anyway. You took that from them. You made their special night into something humiliating." "We didn't mean to hurt anyone," Chelsea whispered. "That's the problem," Rebecca said. "You didn't think about whether you were hurting people or not. You just did what felt right to you, what benefited you without considering the impact on anyone else. And that's why this conversation is happening." James cleared his throat. "You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your workstations. Security will escort you. Your final paychecks will be processed according to state law. Any company property must be returned immediately. You'll each receive a termination letter by email outlining the reasons for your dismissal. Do any of you have questions?" Nobody spoke. "Then we're done here," Diane said, standing up. Security guards appeared at the door as if they'd been waiting for a signal. Morrison was escorted out first, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Then Chelsea, who walked like she was in a daze. Kevin muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse, but he went without resistance. Jennifer was the last to leave, and as she passed Rebecca, she stopped. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said quietly. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry." Rebecca nodded. "I believe you. I hope you learned from this." When the room finally emptied, Rebecca sank back into her chair. The adrenaline that had kept her focused through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her exhausted. "You okay?" Diane asked, sitting down beside her. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "I'm glad we did this. I know it was necessary, but I don't feel good about it." "You shouldn't," Diane said gently. "If firing people felt good, we'd be the wrong people for these jobs. But necessary and easy are 2 different things." James began packing up his papers. "I'll start preparing our defense strategy in case any of those former employees decide to sue for wrongful termination. We have solid documentation, but people sometimes try anyway." "What happens next?" Rebecca asked. "We rebuild," Diane said simply. "Patricia, the assistant manager, is clean. She had no involvement in any of this and has a good track record. We're promoting her to interim general manager while we search for a permanent replacement. We're bringing in a hospitality consultant to help reset the restaurant's culture, and we're implementing new policies across all regional properties." Rebecca sat up straighter. "What kind of policies?" "That's actually something we wanted to discuss with you," Diane said, pulling out her tablet. "This situation has made us realize we have gaps in our training and oversight. We want your input on how to prevent this from happening at other properties." Over the next hour, they outlined a comprehensive plan, mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all employees. Not just a one-time session, but ongoing education. A new anonymous reporting system where staff could report concerning behavior without fear of retaliation. Secret shopper programs where corporate would send diverse evaluators to properties unannounced to assess how guests were actually being treated. But Rebecca kept thinking about something bigger. "Training is important," she said slowly. "But this wasn't about people not knowing better. Morrison knew discrimination was wrong. Chelsea knew. They just didn't care, or they thought they wouldn't get caught. We need accountability systems that work in real time, not months later after dozens of people have been hurt." "What do you suggest?" James asked. Rebecca thought for a moment. "What if we implemented a system where serious guest complaints automatically trigger a corporate review? Not just complaints that get filed away by local management, but direct to corporate reporting. If someone says they experienced discrimination, it goes straight to your office, Diane. It gets investigated within 72 hours. No local manager can bury it." Diane was nodding, typing notes. "I like that. We'd need to build safeguards against false complaints, but the concept is solid. And what about the employees who see this happening but don't speak up?" Rebecca continued, warming to the topic. "We need to create a culture where staying silent isn't an option. Whistleblower protections, rewards for reporting discrimination. Make it clear that protecting guests is part of everyone's job. not just management. They worked through the details, building a framework that could be rolled out across the entire region. It felt good, constructive, like something positive was coming from this ugly situation. Rebecca's phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia, the assistant manager. The staff are confused and worried. Can you address them? Rebecca showed the message to Diane, who nodded. You should. They need to hear from leadership that this isn't about punishing the whole hotel. It's about holding specific people accountable. 10 minutes later, Rebecca stood in the hotel's main conference room facing 23 employees. Servers, housekeepers, front desk staff, maintenance workers. They looked nervous. Rumors had spread fast and people were worried about their jobs. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Rebecca began. I know you've heard that some people were terminated today. I want to be clear about what happened and what it means for the rest of you. She explained the situation honestly but carefully, without unnecessary details that might violate privacy. She told them about the discrimination pattern, the buried complaints, and the management failure. She watched their faces shift from nervous to shocked to, in some cases, knowing. Some of them had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to address it. Here's what I want you to understand, Rebecca said. This hotel isn't being punished. You're not being punished. We removed 4 people who violated our values and broke the law. Everyone else here has an opportunity to help us rebuild this place into what it should be. A place where every guest feels welcome, where every employee feels proud to work, where discrimination has no place at all. A housekeeper in the back raised her hand tentatively. What if we see something wrong? What if we're worried about the same thing happening again? Then you report it, Rebecca said firmly. We're setting up new systems to make reporting easier and safer. Your concerns will be heard. They'll be investigated, and people who discriminate or retaliate against whistleblowers will be removed. That's a promise, a front desk clerk spoke up. Is it true that you were the guest who got turned away from the restaurant? Rebecca paused, then nodded. Yes, I experienced exactly what many other guests experienced. I was judged and dismissed based on appearance rather than treated with respect. The difference is I had the position to do something about it. But I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for every guest who came before me and every guest who will come after. The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined in. It wasn't celebratory applause. It was something else. Relief maybe, or hope. The sound of people who'd been waiting for someone to finally address what they'd been seeing. After the meeting ended and employees filtered out, Patricia approached Rebecca. Thank you, she said quietly. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how bad it was. I should have pushed harder. You're getting that chance now, Rebecca said. As interim general manager, you're going to help build something better here. Think you're up for it? Patricia straightened her shoulders. Absolutely. Rebecca left the Grand Pearl Hotel that evening feeling different than she had 2 days ago. The anger had transformed into purpose. The hurt had become determination. And what had started as one woman being refused a meal had become a catalyst for real change. The work wasn't finished. It was really just beginning. But sometimes that's how progress happens. One person stands up. Others join in. Systems change. And slowly, painfully, things get better. Rebecca got into her car and started the drive back to corporate. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more planning, more work to do. But tonight she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. 3 months passed like water flowing downstream, steady and inevitable. Rebecca found herself thinking about that night at the Grand Pearl less and less, though the changes it sparked continued to ripple outward through every property in her region. The new policies rolled out faster than anyone expected. Every hotel and restaurant now had direct-to-corporate complaint systems with QR codes posted discreetly near reception areas and dining rooms. Guests could report concerns anonymously, and every complaint triggered an automatic review. No more buried complaints, no more managers sweeping problems under the rug. The bias training program became mandatory for every employee, from housekeepers to executives. Not the usual boring slideshow presentation that people doze through, but real conversations about implicit bias, cultural sensitivity, and the actual impact of discrimination. Rebecca had attended several sessions herself, both to show support and to keep learning. She figured if she was going to enforce these policies, she needed to fully understand them. The Secret Shopper program was her favorite addition. Every week, corporate sent diverse evaluators to properties unannounced. They booked rooms, ate at restaurants, and interacted with staff, then filed detailed reports. Properties with consistent high marks got bonuses. Properties with concerning patterns got immediate intervention. The results were remarkable. Within 2 months, guest satisfaction scores across the region jumped by 18%. But Rebecca knew statistics only told part of the story. She wanted to see the real impact with her own eyes. That's why she found herself walking back through the doors of the Grand Pearl Hotel on a Tuesday evening, exactly 3 months after that first visit. This time she wasn't anonymous. She wasn't pretending to be just another guest. She was making an official visit, but she'd deliberately kept it low-key. No big announcement. No warning ahead of time. Just Rebecca wanting to see how things had really changed. The lobby looked the same. Same marble floors, same crystal chandeliers, same view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. But something felt different. The energy was lighter somehow, more welcoming. She made her way toward the restaurant, her heart beating a little faster despite herself. The hostess stand came into view, and Rebecca saw a young man standing there organizing menus. He looked up as she approached and smiled genuinely. "Good evening. Welcome to the Pearl Room. Do you have a reservation tonight, or are you hoping for a walk-in table?" The words were simple, but the tone made all the difference. He sounded like he actually wanted her there. "Walk in if you have space," Rebecca said, deliberately keeping her identity to herself for now. "Absolutely. Let me check what we have available." He tapped on a tablet, his finger scrolling through the seating chart. "Looks like we have several options. Would you prefer a table by the window or something more intimate in the corner?" Rebecca felt tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding start to release. "Window would be lovely. Perfect. Right this way." He grabbed a menu and led her into the dining room. Rebecca noticed immediately how different the atmosphere felt. The diners were diverse, a real mix of people from different backgrounds. Families with kids, young couples, elderly guests, business travelers. Everyone seemed relaxed and welcome. The young man seated her at a table with a beautiful view. "Your server tonight will be Amanda. She'll be right with you. Can I get you started with some water?" "Please, thank you." As he walked away, Rebecca looked around the restaurant more carefully. The staff moved efficiently, but without the tension she'd felt before. They smiled at guests naturally. A server laughed at something a customer said. A busser patiently helped an elderly woman adjust her chair. These were small moments, easy to miss, but they spoke volumes about the culture shift. A woman about 40 years old approached her table with a warm smile. "Hi there, I'm Amanda. I'll be taking care of you tonight." "First time dining with us?" Rebecca decided to be honest. "Actually, no. I was here a few months ago, but things didn't go well that night. I'm giving it another try." Amanda's expression shifted to concern. "I'm so sorry you had a bad experience. Things have changed quite a bit around here recently. New management, new approach. If there's anything at all I can do to make tonight better, please let me know." "I appreciate that," Rebecca said sincerely. "Actually, everything already feels different. In a good way." After Amanda took her order and left, Patricia appeared from the direction of the kitchen. She spotted Rebecca and her face lit up. She walked over quickly, professionally, but with obvious warmth. "Rebecca, I didn't know you were coming tonight. Please tell me this is a good surprise visit and not a problem." Rebecca laughed and gestured to the empty chair. "Sit for a minute if you have time. I want to hear how things are really going." Patricia sat down, and the transformation in her was remarkable. 3 months ago, she'd been nervous, uncertain, weighed down by the problems she'd witnessed but felt powerless to change. Now she carried herself with confidence and clear purpose. "Honestly, it's been amazing," Patricia said. "Those first few weeks were rough. Some of the staff were scared. Some were skeptical about whether the changes would stick. But once they saw we were serious, once they realized this wasn't just corporate talk but actual action, everything shifted." "Tell me specifics," Rebecca encouraged. "Well, we hired 6 new staff members, and we made diversity a priority in hiring. We also promoted 2 employees who'd been overlooked before, people who really deserved advancement but had been passed over by Morrison. Morale is completely different. People actually want to work here now." Amanda returned with Rebecca's appetizer, and Patricia excused herself to let Rebecca eat. But as the evening progressed, Rebecca watched the restaurant operate like a well-oiled machine. More importantly, she watched how staff treated every single guest with the same level of attention and respect. Nobody was being judged at the door. Nobody was being dismissed or made to feel unwelcome. Halfway through her meal, a family was seated near Rebecca's table. 2 parents and 3 kids, the youngest maybe 5 years old. The kids were a bit loud, excited about something, and Rebecca noticed a couple at a nearby table exchange annoyed glances. She watched carefully to see how the staff would handle it. Amanda approached the family with a smile. "Sounds like someone's having a good day. Are we celebrating something special?" "It's my daughter's birthday," the mother said, looking slightly apologetic about the noise. "How wonderful. How old are you today, sweetheart?" Amanda asked, crouching down to the little girl's level. 5, the girl announced proudly, holding up 5 fingers. 5 is such a great age. Well, you picked the perfect place to celebrate. Let me see what we can do to make this birthday dinner extra special. The couple who'd looked annoyed softened visibly. The family relaxed. Crisis averted not through judgment or exclusion, but through kindness and inclusion. It was such a small moment, but Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was what hospitality was supposed to look like. After dinner, Rebecca asked to speak with the full restaurant staff. They gathered in a back room during a lull in service, about 15 people total. Some faces she recognized from that meeting 3 months ago. Others were new. "I want to thank all of you," Rebecca began. "I'm sure some of you know who I am. I'm Rebecca Williams, Regional VP. But more importantly, I'm the guest who was discriminated against in this restaurant 3 months ago. The guest who was turned away while tables sat empty." Several staff members looked uncomfortable, but Rebecca continued gently. "I'm not here to make anyone feel bad. I'm here because I wanted to see with my own eyes what's changed. And what I've seen tonight is exactly what I hoped for. You're not just serving food. You're creating experiences. You're making people feel welcome and valued. Every single guest, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. That's what hospitality means." A server Rebecca didn't recognize raised her hand. "Can I say something?" "Of course, I'm new here. I started 6 weeks ago. But I've worked in restaurants for 10 years, and I've never worked anywhere that felt like this. The training we got about treating everyone with respect, it wasn't just words. Management actually means it. They actually enforce it, and it makes my job easier and more meaningful. So thank you for whatever you did to make this place what it is now." Other staff members nodded in agreement. One of the original employees spoke up. "It was hard at first after everything that happened. We felt like we were under a microscope. But then we realized the changes weren't about punishing us. They were about helping us be better. And honestly, coming to work is so much more enjoyable now." Rebecca left the Grand Pearl Hotel that night feeling something she hadn't expected to feel. Closure, maybe. Or validation that all the difficult decisions, all the hard conversations, all the policy changes had been worth it. But more than that, she felt hope. Real, tangible hope that change was possible, that organizations could learn from their mistakes, that people could grow and improve, that one person standing up could spark transformation that touched hundreds of lives. Her phone buzzed as she walked to her car. A text from Diane. "How'd it go?" Rebecca typed back. "Better than I imagined. The culture shift is real. People aren't just following rules. They believe in them."